Hello, everyone, and warm greetings from wherever you are joining us from the different parts of the world. Thank you for making time to be with us today. In the third workshop in the series of 16 online sessions being jointly organized between the Global Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Center, the World Federation of Engineering Organizations Committee on Anti-Corruption, and Globethics MENA region. You are very much welcome to today's session. Today, like I said, we are going to the third workshop, and we have the privilege of the founder of Globethics, who will be making the main presentation for today's session with us. So I welcome you all to sit tight as we go into an insightful session today. Before I go ahead, as usual, you are welcome to introduce yourself, your name, your institution, the part of the world you are joining us from using the chat box. In the course of our discussions today, please use the Q&A to send all your questions and related comments. The speakers and the panelists will do everything in their power within the time that we have to answer your questions live. Otherwise, they will be answered right there in the Q&A. Just a quick run through of what we should expect today. Mr. Kamel Ayadi will be moderating today's session, and he will come on just after my opening remarks. He will be introducing Christoph Stückelberger, who is our privileged presenter today. He's also the founder of Globethics Foundation, my organization in Switzerland. And then we'll go into some brief discussions. And Mr. Ayadi will come again to tie in all the discussions we're having today. Today, we are going into a session that has to do with ethics and anti-corruption. So he will tie that into our interests as we go into the discussions today. Then we have some important announcements for us. In the course of our training, we have decided to move the training onto an online learning platform. This is also useful for many of us who join us at odd hours in the day. You can go on the platform, create your credentials, access all the content there, and with fellow participants in the discussion forums. I'll be going into the details of that platform later on before we leave our session today. So please stay with us right through to the end as much as possible. So without further ado, permit me to welcome Mr. Kamel Ayadi. He is the chairperson of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations Committee on Anti-Corruption. He is also with the Global Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Center and the Council for Globethics MENA region. With a virtual round of applause, please join me as I welcome Mr. Kamel Ayadi to take on the moderation for today's session. Mr. Ayadi, you're welcome. Your audience, please.
Thank you, Susan, for your presentation. Welcome, Christoph, for today's session, and welcome all of you to this third session. And thank you for being with us and for your perseverance. So today's topic will be a little bit different from previous ones, as we will address the issue of corruption from a different angle. I would say from the soft dimension of corruption. We'll be talking about values, ethics, and integrity. We talked last time about the technical issues and how to address corruption from different angles, from different perspectives. So today we will learn, you and we will, all of us, learn new things about to complement our understanding of the needs for addressing corruption. The topic that of Christoph's presentation today is we do not give up. So he will encourage us to do not to give up values and all the new strategies of reducing corruption for the next decade. I really like the title of this presentation because from experience, sometimes we give up to some disillusionment about fighting corruption because corruption is a very, very complex problem which needs a holistic approach. And sometimes we give up to disillusionment because we don't see tangible results. And about which I will be talking in my second presentation. But let me briefly introduce Christoph Stückelberger today. Then he will give in his presentation also some of the work that he has been doing to address corruption, because he has a lot of experience in fighting corruption from an ethical standpoint. So Christoph Stückelberger, Professor Doctor, is a professor of Globethics and the founder of and honorary president of Globethics, which has a regional office across the world. He is also the founding president of Transparency International Switzerland in 1996, and an anti-corruption trainer in business, public, education, and religious sectors. He's a prolific author and an editor of several books and articles on corruption. One of them is Corruption-Free Religions Are Possible. So today, Christoph will take us to another dimension of addressing corruption. So welcome again, Christoph, and Christoph, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Kamel, for this introduction. It's I'm very happy to be in this session, and I want to share my screen as soon as I can. So as Kamel said, we work together since a number of years, and we share the same experience that anti-corruption issues are not an issue of one day. It's an issue of almost lifelong effort. Let me show these slides and lead you through that in that question. Do you see the slides?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, I chose the title, We Do Not Give Up, or I Do Not Give Up. And the issue is really how to live with that fact. And I start with a short overview of my 30 years of journey to overcome corruption. 1995, only 1 year after Transparency International was founded in Berlin, I founded the Swiss chapter. I worked in development and have seen the importance of bribery to distort and deviate development money and others. When we were working on a debt cancellation, I became aware, why should countries cancel debts of 1 billion, 1 million, and at the same time new debts are done, and we do not deal with a corruption issue. At that time, I was working on the big corruption, the grand corruption, as it was called, business to governments and so on. Then we started 5 years later an international network of faith-based organizations. It did not really fly, but it was an effort. Then last 20 years, 30 years, I did manifold trainings for business leaders, development projects, mission societies, church leaders, university leaders, students in especially Africa and Asia, but also South America. For example, I trained High Court, Supreme Court judges in Mexico on that topic. And I published, and this is visible on the next slide, since 2010 to now, or since 25, and now several books on this. Why churches and education? Because the field of corruption, anti-corruption efforts in business became very famous and also binding. I must congratulate many in the private sector, also standards organizations in the private sector, and your engineering organization, Kamel, is one part of it, to make really steps ahead. But then I have seen that few people only were working on corruption in education, in schools, universities, corruption in religious organizations, because nobody wanted to touch it. It seemed sensitive. But as a theologian and pastor, I had the freedom to touch this field, which I know from inside. So that is why we need to be holistic and look at that. I started with churches, but then as it was mentioned, corruption-free religions was then the topic, because of course we all know that even in Islam, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in all the world religions, corruption exists. Is it in temples? Is it in mosques? Is it in the pilgrimage of Muslim people, as we analyzed in Indonesia, going to Mecca, and so on. So now I come with this question of why I do not give up, and I guess you do not give up, otherwise you would not follow this training. And I list a number of arguments for fatalism, why we could be fatalists, and then for faith or hope. Corruption is as old as humanity, people can say, so we have to live with it. It cannot be eradicated, so we have to live with it. The counter-argument would be the fight against corruption is also as old as humanity. That means always when corruption, even 1,000 years ago, came up, there have been people who stood up. The second argument, almost everybody pays and receives bribes. We know, and I just came back from Africa, DRC, Congo, Nigeria, and everybody tells me you cannot get anything if you are not bribing. This, of course, is exaggerated, but it shows the feeling of people. So what should we do? We just have to adapt. The counter argument would be fatalism is a sin. In all religions, the divine power looks for change and overcoming corrupt practices. The third argument is without corruption, we cannot do business. Of course, business people say, yeah, we don't want to bribe, but we have to in order to get a contract. Without that, we can't get it. Now, the counter argument is business without corruption lives longer. We all know that business people now also go to jail, and business is destroyed, or the reputation, if it's linked to corruption, but we can discuss that more in detail. Another argument is I'm too small to fight, and that is a reality. I mean, if you have no means and you are a street worker or whatever, and you may be too small to change the world, but the counter argument is collective action is needed. I'm a firm believer, but the individual heroes is not enough. My drop of water in the sea does not count nor makes a difference. That's another fatalist argument. And of course, it's true to some extent, but the counter argument is a drop of water for a 30 person makes a difference. Each action, each drop of water counts. So wherever we can, even in small actions, make a sign that corruption is not a fate, corruption is human-made and can be countered. We give as example that it's possible to overcome it. And then I'm not strong to swim against the current. And then I just quote a biblical verse of Jesus to his friends called disciples. You are the salt and the light. You should make a difference. So these are a few to warm up, so to say, because I think we all have to struggle with this inner voice. And people tell me also, yeah, you are now in retirement. Why do you go to the beach? Don't you go to the beach? Why continue this struggle against corruption? I say, no, as long as corruption is there and as long as I can, I continue. Now, behind is the crisis of trust in institutions. There is a severe crisis, and I don't show the statistics. There is this famous trust barometer, which comes out every January, and it shows that after a few moments or months of increased trust during COVID, now trust is again decreasing, and it affects all sectors: governments, judiciary, media, educational, religious, and financial institutions. But I mention only these institutions because these institutions are very critical for the credibility of these institutions. If a business, a company, or a business person is corrupt, people may say, yeah, that's his business, that's his private issue. I'm not so much concerned. But if a public institution, especially the judiciary, and we have Mr. Kramer here who was working with the judiciary, and others among you, Kamel Ayadi, myself. So this is critical. And I just came back from DRC and Nigeria, and in both countries, I have seen the crucial importance of the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court can be bribed, for example, for stolen elections. I mean, we all know, it's not a secret, the current president of Nigeria, this was stolen election. Somebody else was elected, and then through the Supreme Court, he got the stamp that he could stay in power or be in power. And this shows the eminent importance of the Supreme Court. If they give the stamp, nobody else is above the Supreme Court to counter it, except we go to Strasbourg or Den Haag, to the European or international court system. The media is also very critical. Of course, we talk a lot about fake news. It's not on my agenda today, but bribery in media, often not directly, but indirectly, is a big issue. Educational institutions, and especially when it comes to religious institutions, Islamic schools, Christian schools, and Hindu universities in India, when they are corrupt, it affects more because it gives the justification for people to say, oh, me as a politician, I can be corrupt because my bishop is also corrupt. He shows me that it's legitimate. Religious institutions I mentioned already. Finance institutions, of course, not the central banks as such are corrupt, but many financial institutions are affected by this cancer, so to say. Now, I don't need to say much about definitions. You know it: grand corruption, small corruption, but it's always about abuse of entrusted power for personal gain and interests. This is an internationally accepted, agreed definition. So it's abuse of power, and not abuse of power only for another good goal, but for personal interests. And then the poverty, the acceleration corruption, the procurement corruption. You will speak on other sessions of this course on these. Also, the corruption of donations. Sexual abuse is something I also focus on, because when you teach in universities, you always have these female students or also teachers coming to me as a foreigner and say, can I share my story? And it's really heartbreaking to see how students, female students with sexual services can pass the exam, and without that they can't pass. And then, of course, all the gray forms of corruption. Now, my key point on ethics is these two trees, the abuse of power leadership and the integrity leadership. And this is based really on teaching on all continents and training people. And I came to the conclusion that at the end of the day, it's relatively simple, the problem. Either you respect the rules, the laws, the standards, and you want to do the best for your institution, or you abuse your power, and then it's a rotten tree, as I call it, or a dead tree. Mistrust, power manipulation, personal interests at the root cause, and then abuse of resources, absolute loyalty, unqualified staff, and so on. Endless power games, because you have to sideline all those who are not in favor of you. So this kind of absolutism can be on a small scale, in a company, in a university, in a school, or can be on a country level. The integrity leadership is then the other model, which is really to say, I want the best qualified staff, even if they are better than me, because that helps us. Whereas the abuse of power leadership says, no, I want not the best, I want the most loyal, and the most loyal are normally not the best. And that is then the slippery slope where an organization can go down. I respect the rules and controls. I don't change the constitution of a university or of a country in order to have a third term as a president of the country. And it became almost fashion, if I look across Africa, but also Asia, Middle East, and others. Democracy is undermined by the fact that now more and more people or presidents of states say, oh, if the president of my neighbor state changes the constitution with the approval of the board of the parliament to get a third mandate, why don't I do it? We know Kagame in Rwanda, and I could quote many others. So this is one of the root causes when you don't respect the rules. That's why, for example, myself, I retired as president of Globethics, because I designed when I founded Globethics, I designed the statutes, and we said in the board you can be maximum 8 years, 2 years, 3 times renewable, and after 8 years you have to leave the board. So that's what then, of course, I respected for myself. And then people said, yeah, but you are the founder, we could change the statutes. It would have been easy to change the statutes. But I said, no, integrity leadership means you apply the rules also for yourself. So this is just a personal example. And the key is, I call it a one-letter revolution. From the me to the we. If you turn the M to the W, you then see it's the simple point of integrity leadership, ethical leadership. There are different terms for it. Responsible leadership is that I think for the we, for the common good, for the good of the organization, and not just for my personal benefit. That's the core. If you understand this slide, I think we understand the root cause of corruption, but we also understand how we can overcome this root cause. We could go on and in the Holy Scriptures, and that is coming back to the question of how old is corruption. If you look at this psalm in the Bible, 2,500 years old, and it was talking about corruption. The righteousness. So the phenomenon is known since, I would say, at least 3,000 years, since written texts and legal systems were developed. And then I didn't quote the Quran now. There are respective verses. They are in the Bhagavad Gita. We have verses which show that the Holy Scriptures, all in all, do not justify corruption but denounce it. Just to show that we are in a long tradition of fighting corruption. Now, a leader with integrity acts by intrinsic motivation on not just extrinsic, the law tells me or my superior tells me not to do this and that. We abstain from wrongdoing because we say we want to avoid wrongdoing, even if nobody sees it, what we do correctly. Respects and implements laws and regulations, has the courage to do the right thing, even if the crowd does not follow suit. And that is the painful point. I will come back later. Why should you be without corruption if everybody around you does it? I had difficult discussions with junior professors in India who were at the beginning of their academic career, and they came to me and said, I don't know what to do. I want an academic career, but without corruption I cannot become a full-time professor from assistant professor. No way. So very, very painful discussions. So people do not applaud if we are against corruption. On the contrary, a majority, I would say, in the meantime, a majority of people develop mistrust against you if you want to be without corruption. They say, oh, who are you? And you want to be better than the others, and you will fail, and I cannot follow you. This is the bitter reality, unfortunately. Another one is an analytical point. A person of integrity is able to recognize conflicts of interest and resolve them in a transparent manner. That means we introduce, for example, and many institutions do it in the meantime, once a year in January, every staff and every board member in Globethics has to fill in a form about conflicts of interests and say, I was newly appointed in this and this commission, or my wife got a position here and there, and I don't have a conflict of interest because that is totally separated from Globethics, or there could be a potential conflict. You just reflect on it and declare it. It does not mean it must be an actual conflict of interest, but you are aware that you need to be attentive on such situations. And then the other point is also is able to recognize and correct mistakes or failures. We are not expecting that everybody is without corruption, but if you bribe because you have to catch your flight and for an important conference, and you make the bribe in order to pass the visa, to get the visa, the urgent visa, then the importance is that we do not justify it. We say it is wrong, and I did wrong because I gave priority to the flight. But then many people started justifying, oh, everybody's doing it, I had no choice, and so on. No, it remains wrong. And why not say it was wrong, but I did it? Now, integrity builds trust. I shorten that. It is this is very key to build trust. But the problem now is that, as I said, people do not applaud people who are without failure. People applaud people who even went to jail or were sentenced to jail. I mean, if you look at the result of the elections in the US, people can ask why a majority of Americans choose somebody who, from legal terms, from in many aspects, is known, and nobody hides it. Even himself, he would not hide that he has, in legal terms, things that in legal terms we would not accept. So the majority of people prefer sometimes, in some contexts, people who are, so to say, on the bad side, if you like. I'm sorry, it's not politically correct what I said, but it's everybody knows it. So this is the painful question we have now. Why is democracy so vulnerable towards this kind of authoritarian leaders, autocratic leaders, fascist leaders? There are many terms now going around the world, and I'm not talking just about America, I'm talking about so many countries where we know what's happening. Now, that means integrity builds trust, but I would have to add, reflecting about the issues of the last 12 months, maybe integrity also creates mistrust of people who do not like people with integrity. Now, we can go with the other value, which is called responsibility. Responsibility is a key of integrity, or we could also say accountability. That means we feel accountable to what we committed and what was entrusted to us in whatever position, as parents towards the child, as teacher towards children, as students, as employer towards the employee. It's in all power relations. Responsibility means we respond to the needs of those entrusted, and we lead them, we guide them, we correct them, even we may dismiss them if needed. That can be an action of responsibility. So I don't say that everybody is employed has a guarantee to stay until retirement in the job. A responsible business leader may have to cut the number of staff. That is very painful and is not irresponsible if it's done in a careful and not in a stupid or way. So I don't go into details of this, but I have my own, so to say, explanation of the origin of the word responder. In Latin it says res publica pondere. That means give weight to the common good, give priority to the common good, above the own interests. That is the core. But there is another interpretation, my own. Respondere. Spondere means to sponsor, to offer, and respondere means to respond to that. And this has a religious connotation, as you can see on the slide. Now, another term is stewardship. Responsibility as stewardship, not ownership. And I think that is another core issue. A responsible person with integrity looks at the organization not as the own property. Even if you're a private company leader, you set up your company or your NGO, you say, okay, I'm the founder, I own it, so to say, I can do with it what I want. No. Even if you're a founder of an entity, and even more if you are employed as a CEO, as a leader, as a director, as a staff, we do not own the organization. We are stewards to handle it in the best way. And I think that is a very important mindset that is needed, because many people say, oh, I'm the owner, I'm the majority shareholder, I can do with the company what I want. that often leads then to this kind of abuse of power. And I don't quote examples, you know more examples than I can imagine, I'm sure. So now when we speak about power and the responsibility for power, we should not only speak of power of decision making or power of money. There are many forms of power which we can explore and have to be responsible for. Power of decisions, finance, assets, innovation, networks, communication, integrity, reputation, violence, and law and regulations. For example, the networking skills, the communication skills is also a power. As the PR person of an organization, one has an important role to play. Now what are the key values then? If we say integrity, yes, integrity is a core virtue and characteristics of a person. But we have I developed this tree of values and virtues, and the importance is they are like branches on a tree. Freedom, justice, equity, peace, security, community, inclusiveness, participation, forgiveness, stewardship. And you may think, oh, is that random? Is that just a European perspective? I can say I really tested that around the world on all continents. That's why I'm teaching and training and traveling on all continents since 3 decades or more. Also for my development work I did in order to test. And my discovery is that all these are values which are global, which are internationally recognized. The difference comes then in the implementation. Of course, in a Muslim country, equality or equity, women, men, is maybe differently interpreted than in a liberal Western world. But the core of we are human beings and we have to respect each other is there. The notion of peace, the need for security, and so on. So I don't go into details. Of course, we could look at contextualization of these values in detail. And then, of course, the virtues, the values are more general benchmarks for individuals, for communities, and for institutions, and the virtues are characteristics of individual behavior. We cannot say an organization has compassion, the individuals have compassion, but we can say an organization looks for community or for justice, and that of course needs then the virtue of compassion for those acting in the organization. So and the key is now that these values are relational. They are not isolated stars somewhere in the universe, and you can pick what you want just randomly. You say, oh, peace is my value, or freedom above all, but they are related. And this is shown in another circle. You see, I know I like connectivity, relationality, as we call it also, because that is a holistic view of reality. And you can then apply it to anti-corruption. So when I talk now about the values, you may say, oh, what is the link to corruption? I come back to that soon. But the key of this, what I call global balance, a global balance of values, is that in political terms or in social terms, we cannot just say, oh, I'm for sustainability. That means green politics, environment above all. And even if the business dies, I don't care about business. I care about trees and water. tree and water is very fine, but we need also to produce, and we need to survive, and we need to eat and drink and sleep and be in security. So that's why this connectivity is so key. And the same with virtues. And you can download this book, also Globalance. There's a very short link, globalance.world, and you find directly the book for free download. Now, also the UN SDGs are balanced values. I don't go into detail, but it shows that also the anti-corruption efforts should be linked with the SDGs. We cannot reach, it's very simple, we cannot reach the SDGs not only because of war and other disruptions, but also because of corruption. Because the money is then not going to the programs that are needed to reach the SDGs. They are going into private pockets, and they increase the poverty-wealth gap. And so that's why the link between anti-corruption efforts and the SDGs is very important. These are all arguments also why we have to continue with anti-corruption strategies. I don't go into details now, but I want to come to anti-corruption strategies in the last 5 to 10 minutes. So first is in ethics, we distinguish 3 levels. Individual ethics is my personal behavior. Interpersonal ethics is between you and me in a direct relationship or communities. And institutional ethics is then ethics embedded in an institution. The codes, the rules, the code of conduct of an institution, and so on. Now, if you look at anti-corruption strategies, it should include all 3 levels. We need character education. We need our personal inner strength, so to say. That is very important, but it's not enough. We are all weak. We need the help of institutions, of law. That's why those among you who are working as lawyers or in the judiciary or as advisors to judiciary or as politicians, I'm very much respecting your work on this level, because that is institutional level, respecting the rules and standards, which then force us to help us, I would say, help us in our individual behavior. And that's why autocracies are so dangerous, because it means that a person says, I'm at the end of the day, I'm above the law. I'm above the rules of a society. I can dictate. Dictatorship means I can dictate the rules. I'm the rule maker. And that is against this level of checks and balances, of responsibility, of accountability, and all the rest that I just said about values. So we need both. We need the individual strength of the individuals, but we as individuals need the support of communities and of institutions, strong institutions. And that's also why I in the last decades or years, I emphasize more and more also the importance of sanctions. You may say, oh, sanctions, that is not ethical. We should be kind to each other and just educate each other, and then the other person will be converted to the good and be an angel. And the reality is different. The crooks, the thieves, we need to sanction with measures, with laws, with prison. And it sounds a bit strange because many people think, yeah, an ethicist is a softie, he looks at the soft solutions, as it was also mentioned at the beginning of today. Yes, ethics, we look at the soft part, and it's true in the sense that ethics itself has not the power of imposing a value, but why I say ethics and law are twins. Ethics needs the enforcement capacity of the law, but the law needs also ethics as orientation, otherwise it can be a very unethical law. Now, that's why I say the judiciary is so critical. I'm really so worried about all these Supreme Courts, but also country on state level, on provincial level, on local level. Corrupt judiciary is one of the main elements where we do not make progress in anti-corruption efforts. Now the question is, which legal reforms or other instruments are needed to dismiss and sanction corrupt judges? I mean, a few cases happen, but normally it's very difficult to remove, especially if the political forces do not have the will. And I invite all of us to think about that. How can we change judiciary for the better? And I struggle with that since a long time, and the cases are not less, the cases are even increasing. The index of judiciary, there are several indexes internationally, they show that unfortunately the overall in the globe, the credibility of judiciary is not increasing. Of course, there are good countries where there is a change of the political leadership, and then also the courts are cleaned up. So these examples, of course, exist. Now, on a more smaller scale, it is very important to speak about economy. I'm not blaming the policeman in the street who has $70 monthly salary. It's not invented. These are real cases in Nigeria or in DRC, and wants $2 from stopping me on the road. And I take my own example here. If I was teaching now 1 month in a university as a senior professor, my salary was $200, and that is the salary of a senior professor in this Christian university in Nigeria. So imagine, no professor can feed a family with $200, even not in Nigeria or in Sudan or wherever you would say. So what to do? Yeah, you try to get bribes left or right, or you do you have a second job, so you do not teach in your university because you have to teach in 3 universities in order to have to survive. So that's why I talked a few days ago with the vice chancellor of my university and said, look, you have to do something to increase the salary. You cannot, it does not make sense if I give further training of teachers, of professors on ethics. As long as this salary issue is not solved, the professor cannot behave ethically as we all want, and they want to. It's as simple as this. I'm a bit sharp now today, but this is really just last week's dialogue I had. There is the Anti-Corruption Day on 9th December as every year. The topic of this year is Uniting with Youth Against Corruption. I find it a very interesting topic. That means, yes, we should engage more with young people who say enough is enough, we want to make a difference. Unfortunately, we must say a majority of young people play the game as older people in the society. we have to admit, but that does not mean that we cannot organize them and work for uniting with youth against corruption. Civil courage, courage. I don't go into more details. And now many of you are in the tech field, engineers, and I have seen the profile of those attending this course. This is very key. And you have more expertise, but I'm very much in favor of technological solutions. Electronic payment is not a solution for everything, but can reduce corruption, and many other technologies that are in the market. And we should use technologies as much as we can. So I encourage and welcome all of you who are from this field to work on that. And I close with the question of, yes, the price of ethics is a sacrifice. That means we really cannot say it's a free ride. If we want to be with integrity, it has a price, but it has also a gain. I call it the reputation gain. And I ask a bit maybe a strange or surprising question. What do I want people to say about me after my death? Do they say, oh, I know this Christoph, yeah, he was a crook and everybody knew it, so good that he passed away? Or do they say, no, this was a person of reputation and integrity? So this is my end. And I see Kamel coming up. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christoph, for your insightful presentation. You talked about a lot of things that perhaps some of the participants are not used to, because as engineers, and I guess that many of participants have a engineering background, we are much more focused on the hard dimension of addressing corruption. So you took us to another reflection about what is further needed to address corruption. So you talked about the arguments for fatalism versus the argument for faith and hope. And this is, I very much like this. But you listed a number of arguments for fatalism, and I think that we can come up with much more of argument for fatalism, but only strong people with strong belief that can come with argument for faith and for hope, people with strong leadership and people with personality, with characters, people who are resilient, who can come up with much more arguments for hope and for faith. You talked also about the different forms of corruption of power, poverty, acceleration, procurement, corruption of sexual abuse, gray corruption, and you talked about the corruption for needs and corruption for greed. And this is corruption, grand corruption and petty corruption of people who are starving and people who sometimes need to choose corruption because they have no solution for them. So you talked about the main characteristics for a person of integrity, and you talked about also the distinction between the values and virtues and the interaction between ethics, law, and relations, and the three levels of ethics: the individual, the interpersonal, and the institutional ethics. And I fully agree with your comment that today is a lot of emphasis are put on institutional strategies, and institutional strategies are necessary to address corruption, but they are not sufficient if they are not backed, if they are not supplemented by a strong prevention system and a strong transformation of the culture of corporates towards a culture of integrity, culture of ethics, and so on. So you concluded with this very insightful conclusion that ethics is also rewarding in the end because it yields valuable gain, trust, and reputation. And I think when we lose trust, we lose everything. When we lose reputation, we can make some gain, some profit at the short term, but at the long term, we will lose everything. So at the end of the day, trust and reputation are the major assets, not only for corporations, but for individuals like us, because we are perhaps judged about our skills, but when we are much more, when get close to people, people will judge us about our integrity and about ethics. And if we lose ethics and integrity, we lose trust, and we have nothing to do with other skills and other assets. So thank you very much. So now we will open the floor for discussion. I see that we have already 5 questions in the Q&A box that I will encourage you to give and to use the chat box and to send more questions. And if you feel that you can make a meaningful comment, we can upgrade you and promote you to be a panelist so that you can share your thoughts with all participants and everyone can see you. So I encourage you, at least 2 or 3 participants to participate as a panelist. Let me start with the question that I have. Okay. I think the first question and the second question are about the same issue. They are about the election results in Nigeria. Can you expatiate on stolen election results in Nigeria? Can you oblige us with evidence to justify your affirmation of stolen election? The second question is also about the same issue. I leave it to you, Christoph, to answer the first question, then we will go to the second question.
Thank you so much. Maybe I start with another remark which has to do with this one. In the chat, there was somebody saying, yeah, it's sensitive if I mention a specific president of a country like Nigeria. I agree, it's sensitive, but maybe it's a question of age now that I come to the conclusion that we need to address also things directly. And it's not, I mean, I address only what was in the media for months, you know, and in the judiciary in Nigeria. So the person who, in the view of the majority of people, said he won the elections, made a claim, lost in the Supreme Court, but the figures shown had evidence. Of course, I cannot judge the Supreme Court, but what I can do is I'm the executive director of the election school for Central Africa. That is a master course for 18 months in DRC Congo. And there I know now very detailed the mechanisms of the elections in DRC Congo. Because we trained with experts, we know the National Election Commission and all the other actors, the Supreme Court of DRC Congo. So and there is and it's also not a secret. It's public. It's known that. For example, the National Election Commission was not objective, was heavily influenced, and everybody recognizes, even the Supreme Court, recognizes that it was politicized. The Supreme Court of DRC is politicized through the pressure of politicians and the poor or not so poor president of the National Election Commission, whom I know personally, failed in the independency of the National Election Commission. So that's why I'm now very close to these mechanisms in some countries. And that's why I'm also a bit more outspoken and saying we have to name and shame in some extent. But of course, I agree that it is very sensitive, and I do it very carefully only. Now, coming back to the question of stolen elections, I just mentioned already, there is evidence, but of course, no Supreme Court judge would say I'm bribed, and it's not a bribery in the easy sense, you know, that the president or the candidate comes with a suitcase of money to the office of the judge. It's not as simple as this. It's much more complicated, we could look at some evidence for that. What I just said about electoral commissions, you know, the system is also very different in the different countries. For example, in Switzerland, we don't have, or in most of the European countries, we don't have electoral commissions, but in African countries, in colonies, former colonies, it was established soon after independence of these countries. Now that leads me to another short remark in the chat. There is also a remark of colonialism. Did corruption start with colonialism? It was certainly increased with colonialism, but it is not too helpful if we just blame now the colonial powers, because now all these colonies are since 70 plus years independent and have to take their 60 plus have to take their responsibility for their fate. So blaming, shaming former colonial powers is not enough. But it's true. There is an observation that it was increasing. It did exist before. Don't forget, the kingdoms have not been without corruption, but it increased through colonial activities. You also referred to other person who made the remark referred to South America. Now the next point, sorry, yes.
Yes, please, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, another question, if you, from Francisco Gordon. Thank you for the exposition, Christoph. Do we know efforts about a Catholic ethics of capitalism?
Yeah, the question of what is the Catholic ethics saying about capitalism and socialism is a deep one. The Catholic official ethics of the Vatican and the social doctrine, as it's called, of the Vatican, is normally in favor of we would call it the socially and environmentally regulated market economy, not the capitalism in the pure capitalism sense. But that would be a longer debate. And of course, there are also famous Catholic social doctrine specialists who were more in favor of socialist economic models. So the Catholic social doctrine is quite differentiated as the Protestant social doctrine on that question. There are, of course, also even a friend of mine who was blandly saying liberal capitalism in the neoliberal sense is, of course, the best Christian social answer. There are also these. So the spectrum of in Christian ethics is quite broad, but I would say the mainstream of Christian economic ethics, business ethics, is quite differentiated, saying market is a good mechanism, but as long as it's socially and environmentally embedded and regulated.
Thank you. Just if Michael Kramer or Professor Joshua, who are panelists, wanted to say something, please, you are most welcome. Another question is about, okay, you have looked at the integrity, corruption, responsibility, stewardship, among others, from Christian religion. I will like you throw more light on the man Job feared God and shunned evil, and was called righteous by God, but he suffered a lot of problems, lost so many things, but his latter was better than former. So he concludes with a sad conclusion that it is bad to be righteous. I don't think that is a question. If you wanted to elaborate on this,
yeah,
or
maybe
second one.
You know, it shows somehow that the righteous person is ethically seen, or in God's perspective, in the Bible, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam, so-called Abrahamic religions, but also in the Dharmic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Jainism, is seen as the right path. The righteous person is what we should follow. But then the experience is that the righteous person is not rewarded. He is rather suffering. He or she is criticized, loses jobs or money or reputation. And one of the key examples for that is in the Old Testament, the Jewish Christian tradition and of Job. So Job is an example, but so God does not let him fall, but says, yes, I will save you, and at the end of the day was rewarded and healed. But it is an impressive story and encouragement somehow, a realistic story of many people today. So this kind of and we know also in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, some stories about the righteous man who is not a successful one, but had to suffer. So I think it's an important point what you say. My reading of that is we should not take it as a discouragement, but rather to say, yes, we have to be aware that if we fight against corruption, not everybody will applaud, as I said, but we have the inner conviction that it's right to do.
We do it for self-satisfaction, finally.
Yeah, or for the good itself, independent if we find a majority or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with you. Just an invitation to be a bit concise, Christoph, because we still have some other questions. Another question from Ashraf Gorbel. In your experience, what are the key challenges organizations face when trying to instill anti-corruption values, and how can they overcome these obstacles?
Yeah, very briefly, I think that's I give the question back. We all should think about it, and we have good examples where with standards, with rules, the culture in a company, in an organization, in a university can improve, and there are many measures on that. I would not list them now, but so anti-corruption values can be installed, and unfortunately we have to say it's a top-down approach. Normally it has to come from the leadership, but it can also come from the pressure of the people. When the students say enough is enough, so students inputs, for example, in university is also very important. Maybe I just add also the next one, what is great corruption. Marius from Tunisia. Great corruption is that it's not so obvious that it's corruption or not. For example, nepotism. You are a dean of a university and you employ your son, or you give a professorship to your aunt. is that now based on performance or based on nepotism? Is sometimes not easy to answer. So these are fields of great corruption where a favoritism is, a favor is done. Is it based on what? And is it based on pure relation, or is it based on performance or whatever? So that is the gray zone, and it's important that we don't think corruption is always very clear. Also not clear because by definition corruption is done below the table. That means not in the transparency, otherwise it would be can be easily brought to the court. So also the payment, I mean, for example, the payments to ministers for to get a contract for a power plant or whatever, or building a road, that is not as simple as oh, I go with my suitcase and bribe the minister. It's through intermediaries, through overfacturation of services. It's a very complex technology, and Kamel know it better than all of us, I guess. So we need to go. That's why we need the accountants, we need the auditors, we need all the specialists who are used to look at the hidden mechanisms of corruption.
I think we still have 3 or 4 questions. If you wanted to take a brief, Christoph, we can leave them for after my presentation. And if you want, because we still have 45 minutes, then if you agree, I would invite you to take the lead as a moderator, because I will be the speaker.
Okay, maybe I just can answer 1 or 2, and then
yes, please.
The root cause of corruption, man has been driven by selfishness that makes him want everything to be his own. This is certainly one thing. As Kamel said, greed. But again, I would not put it only on individual greed issue. It is a structural issue. A structural issue also of, for example, let's open a window without explaining it, but the crying gap of currency, the dollar dominance leads to that kind of poverty. And I've seen it face to face to the people, how middle class people in Nigeria are now in the last 12 months going to the poverty again. One reason is this crying the dollar dominance, which means that the dollar is now 2,700 naira, and it was 1,500 naira some 2 years back. So your purchase capacity is simply so that the structural. It's not only the greed of individuals. These are structural issues we have to address. So maybe I stop here and can take the others after your presentation.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, I will share my screen.
Thank you for all those who raised the questions, great points or remarks.
Continue the, okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I have put together a few slides to share some thoughts with you on today's topic. And as you have seen, today's topic are somewhat different from the previous ones. Today we are addressing corruption from a completely different angle, from ethical and integrity perspective. So in my presentation, I will try to use my magnifying glass of ethics and integrity glass to interpret the prevailing strategies on anti-corruption over the past decades and how they accommodate the ethical dimension. And the purpose of this presentation is to show you that when the anti-corruption approach neglect the dimension, the integrity and ethics dimensions, they will fail. And this is what we have experienced in a number of countries. Strategies failed only because they were unidimensional and they didn't combine compliance, integrity, and integrity. So this is the only one that we can fight corruption effectively. So as I said, most of the strategies, they tend to overvalue the hard dimension. And what by hard dimension, I mean the prosecution dimension, which is based on rules, procedures, toughening the rules, prosecution, and so on, while neglecting to supplement all this by a transformation of culture towards a culture of integrity and a culture of ethics. So I will So I will be mainly talking about the limitations of hard dimensions of strategy which focus on the hard dimension. So today I wanted to anticipate one conclusion, which is from my personal experience. Have been involved in a number of, from different angles, from government perspective, from civil society activist perspective, from consultancy perspective. I have been involved in a number of anti-corruption efforts throughout the world. And the conclusion that I wanted to anticipate, that nowadays, anti-corruption approach need to be adjusted. This is the consensus. And I will explain why we come up to this consensus. But my point of view that we need much more than adjustment. We need a paradigm shift. And the difference between adjusting an approach, an anti-corruption approach, and changing paradigm is huge. Adjusting approach means that just you will look and at how things should be done. But shifting paradigm, you need to reconsider in very profound way the assumptions, the beliefs, the mindset, and the framework of those approach. So the reason why approaches should be reviewed is because of the simple conclusion that nowadays, after decades of strategies, anti-corruption strategy, the paradox that most countries have developed, deployed anti-corruption strategies. They transposed the United Nations Convention's provisions into their legal framework. They create an institutional framework which is made up of a number of institution ethics and supreme audit institutions, control, inspection, and so on. But the result is very much less than expected. And I can't just leave you with this figure, which is provided by Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International. I have a lot to say about Transparency International and its indicator, but it's still a source of information. 86% of countries made no significant progress in combating corruption over the past decades. The same conclusion came also from the World Bank with its world governance indicators, which say that control of corruption, that the corruption has remained relatively stagnant worldwide since 1990s. So nowadays there is a genuine concern about the usefulness of the new generation of anti-corruption strategies, which are viewed with skepticism. And I've read and I have read and listened to some analysis that says that why do we spend all this money? Why do we spend all these efforts with such a very, very, very limited results? So for this reason, nowadays, the consensus is that we need to rethink and to reconsider the approaches on anti-corruption. But I would say that is not only a problem of strategy and approach, technical approach, but it's also a problem of a paradigm. So to address corruption, and this was said by Christoph, corruption is a very complex problem. So it requires a systemic and holistic approach. But what we can say today about the approach in many, many countries, that they are still reductionist rather than systemic. They focus on individual components in isolation. They rather address symptoms rather than the root causes. When you see that most of corruption, they focus on prosecution without taking care of the prevention to build a preventive system. That means they only address the symptoms, not the root causes. So reductionist approaches also address specific segments of the issue without considering their relationship to the whole system. So what we have seen that the approaches which are built around law enforcement and prosecution, they can, of course, deliver short-term results because prosecution is essential to end impunity, but their sustainability and their resilience is not guaranteed. But not only that they may fail, but they can also cause collateral damage. What kind of damage they can cause? They can cause collateral damage because sometimes they create environment which cannot foster the spirit of initiative. Administrative environment with a lot of bureaucracy, which slow down the pace of doing business, and more other damage, collateral damage. So corruption is not just a lack of compliance, because when we hear about corruption, we hear that the solution, the ultimate solution, put rules and create a compliance program. It's not only about a lack of compliance. It's not also the result of a deficit in ethics and integrity, which was said by Christoph. Although they are essential, we have also factors such as poverty, inequality, limited access to essential public service, and bureaucratic hurdles create environment where favoritism and extortion can thrive. So systemic approach are the solution because they address a multifaceted problem like corruption. So let me make a brief retrospective analysis about the global efforts for the past decades since the inception of the first movement against corruption. Roughly speaking, we can distinguish three essential phases with a new emerging one that I will end my presentation with it. The first phase was the advocacy phase. It was the 80s and the 90s. It was the period which marked the emergence of international NGOs and advocacy groups such as Transparency International and political activists. It was also the phase of the emergence of corruption measurement indicators, the CPI, Corruption Perception Index, the World Bank Index, Variety of Democracy, and we have much more index. So for this phase, I would categorize this phase as a very successful phase, because there were 4 major achievements and 1 significant breakthrough in the advocacy phase. The first achievement was breaking the silence and lifting the taboo on corruption. So corruption, nowadays we can talk about corruption everywhere. And even in corrupt countries, even in prisons with authoritarian regime, we can talk about corruption. So corruption is no longer a taboo. The second achievement is that corruption, which was previously seen as an internal problem, became a global issue, which needs global solutions. The third achievement is that the quantifying corruption and highlighting its impact on economic development, poverty, trust, and public decision makers, and so on, thanks to all the global indices. I have a lot to say, and you will see that in my presentation in the coming weeks. I will address the issue of the reliability and legitimacy of global indices, because I have some criticism about them, but they still be a source of information that we can rely on when we want to talk about quantifying corruption. The fourth achievement is they pointed the finger at countries where corruption is endemic through the global ranking. And this was a great achievement when Transparency International publishes the ranking, and some countries see themselves on the bottom of the ranking, and they are seen to everyone. The significant breakthrough which culminated this phase is the adoption of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the GIACC, in 2003, which was ratified by 187 member states. So corruption was and still continues to be recognized as a global problem requiring a coordinating response. So the second phase after the advocacy phase is the emergence of legal instruments and the criminalization of corruption. After the adoption of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, most of countries ratified the GIACC, and they made a lot of effort to transpose its disposition, to their local legal framework. So corruption is nowadays criminalized almost everywhere. In this phase also, we witness the historical prosecution of multinationals, corporations, and corrupt individuals. Many multinational prosecutions were prosecuted. Siemens case, you know, Alstom, Halliburton, Airbus, Rolls-Royce, and many, many other. And we know also a lot of prosecutions took place in a number of countries, and I will come to some of these countries. And the third phase, which started almost in 2010, is the third phase, is the professionalization phase, with the emergence, which was marked by the emergence of anti-corruption management tool and standard. So corruption is being, from the inception of that phase, being viewed as a management issues that should be dealt with through managerial solution. Corruption is being considered as a risk that every corporation faces, like any other risk that should be dealt with in the same manner as other risks. So we have seen a number of standards. The first one, and we have participated in WFEO and the GIACC in most of these. I was a member of the committee who drafted the anti-bribery management system, which was issued in 2016. I'm still continuing as an expert to work with the group, or ISO group, which is developing the ISO standard in conflict of interest, another standard about compliance management, ISO 31,000 risk management, another ISO standard about whistleblowing management system, governance of organization, and so on. So let me just share with you a brief analysis and findings, roughly speaking, about these previous phase. I can say first that developing countries, or most of them, are still struggling to keep pace with these developments. They don't have the resource to integrate each phase. Most of them missed the professionalization phase. It could be due to a lack of expertise, resources. It could be also another factor, which is the rigid beliefs. Many countries got stuck in the prosecution phase. Those who from participants who belong to developing countries, you know that particularly when anti-corruption efforts are driven by political purpose, the ideal solution is always seen prosecution. If you wanted to address corruption, send people to jail, because this is the only solution. I'm not against this, but I have this should be nuanced, because this could bring a lot of other challenges. And the number of ISO 37001 corporation which have been certified against ISO 3701 up to 2024 is 6,000 corporations. And this number doubled from 2021 to 2024, only in 3 years. But when we look of corporations in developing countries, they do not represent even 2 or 3%. And this is why I can say that developing countries has completely missed the professionalization phase. So we see also another shortcoming, which is in these countries, they give minor role to the bodies responsible for prevention. The audit, the control, the supreme audit institution. There is also a lack of ethical approach. So this could be due to a lack of resources. Sometimes in many other countries, it's just the absence of political will, absence of local expertise, incentive, and so on. But let me just share with you this thought that in developed countries, the driving force for the professionalization step is laws like the UK Anti-Bribery Act of October 2010, which has provided an innovative regulatory provision, which is the offense of failure to prevent corruption. So it's not only corruption which is criminalized, but the lack of corruption, the lack of putting together a preventive system. So chief executive officers, they are not accountable for corruption. They are accountable for putting together and creating a robust prevention system. So this was a turning point in the history of corruption. Some other analysis on anti-corruption strategy based solely on repression and tightening of laws and regulation, they have only partial or sometimes complete failure. But more than failure, they had lasting collateral damage. And I spoke about bureaucracy. I spoke about loss of trust, because when you rely only on the legal system, that means you rely on regulation and you don't rely on individuals. Ethics means that you rely on individuals to do the right things. But if you don't trust them, you will put heavy bureaucracy and you will toughen the rules measure. And all this comes at a high price. So the experience has shown that massive anti-corruption campaigns have not eradicated corruption. And I will give you just 2 examples. For God, as corruption, after some prosecution and massive prosecution, corruption takes new form and adapts. And I will give you some concrete example about this. So massive repression can be effective because it sends a strong and a clear signal for the end of impunity. But without complementary, permanent, and active value-based mechanism to ensure transparency, integrity, and ethics, leading to a profound cultural transformation, massive prosecution will remain useless. So let me give you just an example of how some countries have dealt with corruption using massive prosecution. And the most famous action of repression is the clean hands. It's the largest one in the history, which took place in Italy in 1992. More than 5,000 people were indicted, including high-ranking politicians, business leaders, 400 members of parliament, civil servants, and even judges. The investigations covered a system of clientelism and widespread corruption. 1,200 people were convicted, including 2 prime ministers. One of them, Craxi, he spent his last day in Tunisia because he fled to Tunisia. And 2 ministers committed suicide. And the consequences of that massive repression of corruption was the collapse of the First Republic in Italy and the disappearance of political parties and the emergence of new political populists. But nowadays, 30 years of hindsight, the conclusion could not be better synthesized than by this newspaper. Look at the title of this the newspaper: "Clean hands, 30 years later, hearts are still dirty." So this massive prosecution only provided superficial changes. Corruption has re-emerged again, and we assisted to a normalization to corruption. Corruption is now being tolerated much more than before. And ironically, the convicted prime minister, I forget his name, won the election again in 2001. The prime minister, Berlusconi, yeah. Berlusconi, who was convicted in 1992 for corruption, won again the election in 2001. What would you call this? It's a normalization of corruption. Corruption is being admitted because of the mistake, which I will point later. So another example of massive repression against corruption, which took place in Brazil in 2014. It's similar to what happened in Italy. Dismantling of a huge corruption scheme within the well-known state-owned company Petrobras, high-ranking officials, including senators, deputies, business leaders, and even more, 2 former presidents were indicted and convicted. One of them is, you know him very well, Lula da Silva. The impact of that massive crusade against corruption, the operation contributed to the election of the inexperienced populist President Bolsonaro in 2018. It's a surprise because every massive prosecution help populists to rise again. It happened in Italy and it happens also, it happened in Brazil. So Bolsonaro capitalized on the anger of the population after the massive prosecution against corruption. But the result that corruption did not disappear, and the imprisoned former President Nura Zelfa returned again to power. This is, I wanted to tell you that massive prosecution, which are admitted as the ideal solution, cannot bring alone the end, contribute to the end of corruption. Let me give you another example, but is slightly a successful example. It's not the only the state which were subjected to massive prosecution. Global and multinational corporations also were subjected to massive prosecutions. I will just give you the example of Siemens, and you can find a lot of other examples. You know the scandal of Siemens in 2008, an investigation revealed that Siemens has paid around 1.4 billion euros in bribes in several countries to secure contracts. Siemens used a very sophisticated scheme, a complex network of shell companies and intermediaries to conceal payment. After the discovery and thanks to the legal transformation that happened with the OECD Convention of 1997, Siemens accepted to pay a financial penalties which was equal to $1.6 billion. It's almost 10% of the budget of a small country like Tunisia. So it's a huge amount. In addition to the payment of this penalty, the Siemens leadership and management were indicted. More than 400 people. Some of them were imprisoned, and some others were dismissed. But this was a very good lesson for Siemens. Siemens, after that, accepted to introduce a comprehensive compliance program. But, and I underline this compliance program was just a bridge to a culture of integrity. So the ultimate objective of Siemens was to replace a culture of compliance with a culture of integrity. And there are a lot of confusion about the ultimate purpose of compliance program. Compliance program are not just they should be implemented for a short term, but for the long term they should lead to a culture transformation, to a culture of integrity. Siemens also made a commitment to transparency through audit mechanism and so on. And through these efforts, Siemens was able to restore its reputation and to strengthen its market position. I have a problem with, what's the problem? Okay, yeah.
Maybe you can come to a conclusion in a few minutes so that we have a few minutes for questions after.
Yeah, okay, I will conclude with this. I will end my presentation with the conclusion because I wanted to come to this conclusion because this is the main purpose of my presentation. And the conclusion is why have extensive punitive measures achieved significant and lasting results within multinational corporations, but not at the state level. So multinational corporation, and this is true not only for Siemens, but is true for most of the multinationals, have successfully moved from a culture of corruption at a time where corruption was used as a business driver. They moved to a zero tolerance of corruption. I know the Siemens case, and I can affirm that this is the true. In Siemens, it's an example that we use in teaching compliance and to teach integrity. And the question, should state learn from corporate example? Because they're both entities, they are different. Multinational corporations, they are different from states, but they share a common potential for exposure to corruption. And they also share the same experience as both were subjected to massive prosecution. And we can see here that the scale of corruption is always proportionate to the turnover and to the number of employees. And in this table, you can see here that Siemens, the turnover of Siemens is 3 times the annual budget of a country of Tunisia, is 7 times the annual budget of a country like Brazil. It's 7 times also the budget of Uganda. The number of employees is also the half of the employees in public sector in Tunisia, the double of employees in the public sector of a country like Senegal. If you see Amazon, it's much more enormous. Amazon, it's the budget, the turnover of Amazon is the budget, the annual budget of 10 African countries in the number of employees. So the potential of exposure to corruption is almost the same. But why the massive prosecution succeeded in these corporations and failed in most of the countries? Because, and this is the moral of the story, punitive actions, and this is what I want you to take away. Punitive actions should be limited in time. This was the case of international corporations. Should be limited in time, in scope, and purpose. It should aim to rehabilitation, not a revenge. A prosecution is not a revenge against political party, against individuals. It's just an act of rehabilitation. And this massive prosecution against international corporations, they prevent the downfall of the company. When the World Bank and the judiciary system prosecuted the Siemens, the first objective was to save Siemens as a company, because a lot of work it has made a lot of breakthrough in terms of technology and so on. So the first thing that we should do is to save, to preserve the company, and to punish those who are responsible for corruption, and to limit the punishment. But if you study, if you analyze how the prosecution was done in a number of countries, it was like a revenge. It was mixed because the political purpose, and because the prosecution done to officials was driven by political purpose. But here it was driven by judges who prosecute only for the sake of justice, not for other things. So the second thing which country missed is a prosecution system should be supported immediately after the prosecution by a management change that rehabilitates the institutional function, the audit, control, compliance, to prepare a culture change based on a culture of integrity. And this is the conclusion that I wanted to come to, is that prosecution, toughening the rules, compliance alone, they cannot end corruption. What would end corruption is what I will just, the last slide, is the integrated approach. So nowadays, we plead to the fourth phase, which is towards integrated approach, the emergence of new paradigm towards the systemic and integrated approach that combine ethics, integrity with the prosecution and the regulations. So in some countries, I wouldn't say that all countries, there are successful countries. When I speak about this in Singapore, my friend from Singapore, they told me, no, the prosecution has been successful in our countries. This is not only the case of Singapore, it's the case of Hong Kong, South Korea. They started 50 years ago by prosecuting their way out. But the prosecution was supplemented immediately by a robust preventive system, by a system that led to a culture change. So this is some countries in their anti-corruption approaches, they need some adjustment, but some others, and I know many of them, they need a complete paradigm shift. I think I will stop here because I delivered the main message that I want you to take away. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kamel, for this very stimulating and interesting lessons learned, so to say. Yeah, you started with the 4 phases during the last 40 years, 1980 to 2024. You brought the examples of clean hands in Italy and others in Brazil and others. And then this question of this paradigm shift as the key message of your presentation. How can we not only count on prosecution and legal measures, which are still needed and successful, as you said, but need other approaches as the legal measures have not been successful overall worldwide. So thank you very much. I suggest we use the few remaining minutes before giving back to our host of Globethics for a few questions that are still in the pipeline. And maybe I can add one remark also. The question was how to use AI as a measure. And I would suggest we look at AI like other technologies. It's a technical instrument, and as other instruments, I guess it can be used, but we should not overemphasize, as Kamel just mentioned. The technical solutions are an important part, but we should not hope that corruption can be limited mainly through that. That would be my approach, without knowing too much about AI application in anti-corruption. I think it's still a new field. Do you want to add something on that question, Kamel?
Yeah, I can add something about this question, but I think I will leave it to Michael Kramer because I think he will address this issue in his coming presentation.
Okay, so it will come up again. So the other point was coming back to the question of integration of religion. And the person who asked, Chrissy, said, yes, religion is more and more sidelined, at least in the Western world. It's true. And how can it be integrated as a tool of solution and not only of problem? I think one is what I try to say with the efforts of corruption-free religions. I think the credibility of religions, of religious institutions and leaders is depending on if the religions themselves, so the religious institutions or leaders, take measures, because the credibility is also undermined if in these institutions they suffer also from corruption. And it's not a surprise, because they are part of society and they are affected by the disease, so to say, as all other sectors. But that would be one of my answers. That's why we need to have anti-corruption measures within the religious institutions in order to increase their weight and their credibility in their anti-corruption efforts and campaigns. The other point is, I think what was visible, if I may use it for a kind of overall summary of this event, the whole question, what are the legal measures compared to educational and soft measures and ethical measures, and so to say, individuals who make a difference. And Kamel Ayadi, you made it very clear with his careful analysis of the last 40 years that the legal and measures and institutional measures are needed, in a number of cases successful, but are not enough. So that's why you talk about a paradigm shift. not replacing these measures, but not adding endless costs, as you say. But I mean, I may take a pro domo, a simple example, to implement a whole procurement mechanism with all the reporting mechanisms and legal and others is very costly, as you said. If we would increase the number of hours of ethics trainings in companies, in public sector, in universities or primary schools, in churches, it would cost maybe 5% of the other measures. But the effect is probably as measurable or as big as these legal measures which you mentioned are not as effective as everybody hoped. So these are a few remarks from my side, not a true summary, but I think I hope that during this training, this TOT, this question of what are the most impactful measures is on the table and will be in future sessions again. And the other which was on the table from my opening and then taken up by Kamel is how to overcome or fight against. In the gains is not an overcoming, the fight against and against this fatalism, which is then a root cause of accepting, it's an evil like other evils in the world. It will exist ever as it was existing ever. And this fatalism then demotivates people to do something. And I think in this club here, if I may call us, these 80 people, 70, 150 all in all registered, we can make a difference if we are working together on in a continuous way over decades to come. And with that, I give back to you, and thank you so much for moderating that. Yes, you have the floor to close.
Thank you, Christoph, for your remarks. So now I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and please stay tuned. We will have in the coming weeks other session and other which will address corruption from different angles, and which will provide also some responses about the best way to address corruption. And Christoph, you talked about the role of artificial intelligence. Of course, there is a role of artificial intelligence, and this will be addressed in one of the sessions. So with this, I will turn over the floor to Susan to make some announcement and tell you goodbye and have a nice night or have a nice day for those who are still in the Western Hemisphere.
All right. Thank you so much, Christoph and Kamel, for the insightful presentations. There is a lot for us to go and consider, and also not forgetting that we are important in the equation in fighting corruption. So we all should make our efforts in our various spaces. Thank you so much to everyone also for staying with us in these 2 hours. Just some quick announcements. I have put there in the chat and here on your screen. You can access more of Christoph's books on Globethics website. Globethics runs a publications house and houses also a free-to-access library with ethics resources. So when you go on there, you can access any of these resources. There are a lot of them, about 3.7 million resources on applied ethics. So access them for your use. And going also
and about 80 books that I published and edited.
You see, yes, indeed. And we also want to invite participants to come on board as panelists. An email will be sent to you so you can reference that and just indicate your interest if you want to join as a panelist or even as a moderator. The space is available. And please go ahead and save the dates for the TOT. We are continuing all the way to June next year. We'll be together on the online platform. So please save the dates and make it a point to join the sessions as they unfold. Our next session comes up in 2 weeks on the 20th of November, and we'll be hearing from Michael Kramer, who has been with us. He has already given us some wonderful insights in the previous sessions, and we look forward to that session on how to investigate corruption in construction projects in about 2 weeks' time. So please, once again, do save the dates. Just a quick announcement. In starting today's session, I mentioned that we are moving the TOT onto an online learning platform. An email will be sent to all of us so that we can fill a quick form, and the form will then give you access to the platform. Please go ahead and fill the form so you can have log-in access to the platform. On that platform, you will have all the details on the course. You will have all the materials on the course. The videos are uploaded there, all announcements, everything to do with the course. And also we have some open discussion forums where you can put in your questions and we can engage each other and to discuss all that is unfolding in the presentations right there on the platform. So please look out for that email. It will be coming to you shortly. I want to thank you again for your time and for all of us joining us from different parts of the world in today's session. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you again, and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you all, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
And Mr. Kramer, happy to hear